It was Halloween night, and my friends and I were on edge from the start. It was a cold October evening, and the air was filled with the eerie laughter of kids in costumes, their voices echoing through the streets. My friends and I had made plans to go trick-or-treating, even though we were getting a bit too old for it. We were the mature 13-year-olds, but Halloween had a way of bringing out the kid in everyone. We decided this year would be different. We'd venture out to the old manor on the edge of town, a place whispered about for years, but that no one dared visit. Just as we reached the edge of the woods leading to the house, Danny, the bravest among us, dared us to step into the yard. "Come on," he said, grinning. "Are we gonna let some creepy old house scare us off?" Inside, shadows stretched across the floor like dark vines, wrapping around every corner. The floorboards creaked under our feet as we tiptoed through the hallway. The smell was a mix of dust and mildew, with something faintly sweet and rotten lingering underneath. We were moving carefully when suddenly, a loud crash echoed from upstairs. None of us wanted to admit it, but that sound made our hearts race. Danny, being the fearless leader he was, motioned for us to follow him up the narrow staircase. As we climbed, each step seemed to echo louder, until it was all we could hear. Then, just as we reached the top, the door at the end of the hallway creaked open on its own. Inside the room, we found an old, dusty mirror covered in strange symbols. None of us dared look into it for long, but we all felt like something was staring back. Danny reached out to touch it, his fingers leaving marks on the thick dust covering the glass. "Do you think it's haunted?" he whispered. That's when the mirror started fogging up, like someone was breathing on the other side. We stumbled back, shocked, but we weren't fast enough. A handprint appeared on the glass, smudged and thin, like it had pressed from the other side. It felt like we were intruding on something we shouldn't see, something waiting just beyond the glass. We all stood frozen, staring at the handprint that seemed to press from the other side of the mirror. Then, without warning, Danny's face twisted in shock as he whispered, "Guys, it's moving." Sure enough, the handprint was sliding down, slowly vanishing as if being pulled away. Our minds raced, but our feet were glued to the floor. "Let's get out of here," I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. But just as we turned to leave, we heard a faint giggle, like a child's laughter, echoing from behind us. None of us could figure out where it was coming from. The laughter grew louder, turning into a slow, creepy hum. Danny, looking visibly shaken, insisted we stay. "If we leave now, we'll never know what's going on here. Don't you want to find out?" But his voice lacked its usual confidence. Despite our better judgment, we stayed, curiosity tugging at us just as much as the fear. The hum faded, and silence took over. We moved closer to the mirror, hoping to understand the strange symbols on the frame. Danny started tracing one with his finger, and as he did, the symbol began to glow faintly, illuminating the room with a cold, greenish light. We watched in horror as the light reflected back at us, showing not only our faces but shadowy figures standing behind us. Panic took hold, and we turned around, expecting to see someone, but there was no one there. We were alone in the room. Turning back to the mirror, the shadowy figures were gone. Now, all we saw was our own terrified reflections. Suddenly, Danny's face in the mirror started to change. His eyes went dark, and his mouth twisted into a sinister grin, even though he wasn't moving. "Stop it, Danny," one of us shouted, but he didn't respond. In the mirror, his reflection began to whisper, "Come closer." Danny's real mouth remained closed, but his reflection kept whispering. None of us could breathe. It was like the air had thickened. Then, the lights flickered, and the reflection disappeared, leaving the mirror pitch black. As we backed away from the mirror, something brushed past me. I turned, expecting to see one of my friends, but they were all in front of me. My blood ran cold. "Did anyone else feel that?" I asked, but before anyone could answer, the door slammed shut behind us. The bang echoed through the empty house, making our skin crawl. We ran to the door, pulling and pounding on it, but it wouldn't budge. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped. Our breaths came out in visible puffs, and the silence was replaced by a faint scratching sound coming from the walls. Danny put his ear against the wall, trying to listen. "It's coming from inside," he whispered, backing away in fear. Just then, cracks began to form, slowly spreading across the walls, like something was trying to claw its way out. One of the cracks split open, revealing what looked like an eye staring back at us. Terrified, we backed into a corner, watching as more cracks appeared, each one revealing more eyes, all fixed on us. They seemed to blink and move, tracking our every step. That's when we heard footsteps coming up the stairs, slow, heavy footsteps, getting louder with each step. "We're not alone here," whispered Danny, and he was right. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. A soft, raspy voice whispered from the other side, "I see you." We held our breaths, paralyzed, as the doorknob slowly began to turn. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, and everything stopped. The door was open, the mirror was back to normal, and the eyes in the walls had vanished. It was as if none of it had happened. Danny quickly led us out of the room, and we rushed downstairs, desperate to escape. But as we reached the bottom of the stairs, we noticed something strange. The front door was gone. Instead, a dark hallway stretched before us, filled with shadow and an eerie silence. We had no choice but to move forward, our footsteps echoing as we walked. At the end of the hall, there was a door slightly ajar with a faint, flickering light coming from inside. Pushing the door open, we found ourselves in what looked like an old nursery. Toys lay scattered on the floor, covered in dust, and a rocking chair creaked in the corner. On the wall, written in red paint, were the words, "They never left." The rocking chair stopped suddenly, and we heard the faint whisper again, "Come play with us." I glanced around the room, desperate for a way out, but every door seemed to lead us further into the twisted maze of this house. Danny, now visibly terrified, was no longer the fearless leader we knew. "Let's get out of here now," he yelled, but none of us knew the way back. Just then, we heard the same faint giggle from before, only this time, it was closer. We turned and saw a small, shadowy figure standing in the doorway. The figure's face was hidden in shadow, but its eyes glowed, watching us. It raised a tiny hand, beckoning us to follow. Against all sense, we followed the figure down another hallway, feeling like we were being pulled into a trap. The figure led us to a room at the end of the hall, where a single candle burned in the middle of the floor. The figure disappeared, leaving us alone with the candle flickering. Danny approached the candle, and as he did, the flame grew brighter, casting shadows around us that seemed to move on their own. The walls around us began to shift, and the room seemed to stretch, warping in a way that made us feel dizzy. Then, in the candlelight, we saw them, shadowy forms circling us, growing closer with each second. We huddled together, too terrified to move. The shadows grew closer, their twisted faces barely visible in the dim light. Just when we thought we were trapped for good, a loud crash broke through the darkness. One of our friends had broken a window, letting in the cold night air. In a rush, we leapt through, stumbling into the yard outside. When we looked back, the house was silent, the lights off, and the windows dark. It was as if nothing had happened. We didn't speak a word, just ran as fast as we could back to town, never daring to look back. Later, when we told others what we'd seen, no one believed us. But every Halloween since, the memory haunts us. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still hear the faint giggle and the whisper calling, "Come play with us."